Hi, it's Jeff Wise. Welcome back to Finding MH370. In episode 6, we looked at a paper by Usama Kadri, who analyzed some hydroacoustic data from the southern Indian Ocean, looking at the possibility that a sound from MH370 had been detected. And we likened it in that episode to the Sherlock Holmes case of the dog that barked in the night. Specifically, the dog wasn't heard barking in the night. Therefore, we can assume that the dog didn't bark, and therefore there wasn't an unknown person who committed the murder. Kadri based his work on historical antecedents. He looked at other plane crashes that had taken place in the ocean, and he looked at whether those events had been detected by this hydroacoustic microphone network. And in case after case, he found that it had been detected, and therefore he went on to assert that an event that was closely related in time to MH370 was also detected, and therefore said this is an event that we really need to look carefully at. It turned out that it didn't match very well, which raises a kind of conundrum. And he suggested that we needed to do more research to look into it. Kadri's paper got a lot of attention in the popular press, so I really wanted to look at it and bring it to the readers and listeners and viewers of this podcast. To me, it seemed to suggest that the plane did not go into the southern Indian Ocean because the event that he detected didn't really match up very well with what we know from the satellite data. Therefore, the best explanation for the fact that this thing wasn't detected was that it just didn't happen. But as I've argued over and over again, science isn't just about finding facts, looking at what they mean, and drawing conclusions. It's more complicated than that. Science is a collective endeavor. It involves different people looking at the logic, looking at the evidence, looking at the conclusions, and arguing about it, essentially, saying, listen, I think you're misinterpreting this. I think you're leaping to conclusions here. And indeed, in the course of the days and weeks that followed the release of Kadri's paper, other scientists who do this for a living, who look at hydroacoustic data, had some issues. And I reached out to some of them. And with me today is one of them, Dr. David Dell'Osto, who is a researcher at the University of Washington Applied Physics Laboratory. He's been studying the ocean and specifically hydroacoustic data for 3 decades. So he knows a lot about how these things work. And he had some things to tell us. It turns out that things are not so simple, which is almost inevitably the case with MH370. Anyway, David Dell'Osto co-authored a paper called Revisiting the Acoustic Detections Made in the Indian Ocean at the Time of the Loss of MH370. He co-authored it with Alec Duncan of Curtin University in Perth, Australia. And I'm going to put I'm going to make this paper available together with the Kadri paper at the show page at findingmh370.com. Findingmh370.com. We're going to raise the issue of, was Kadri right? Or is the mystery of MH370 noises a lot more hazy and mysterious than he made it out to seem? Well, let me start by saying, David, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. You and I spoke earlier, and we talked about some of these issues. So let's jump right into it. I had talked about the Kadri paper in an earlier episode. So viewers who don't know what we're talking about should probably go back and watch that. But long and short, Kadri published a paper talking about acoustic events in the ocean and whether they can be detected and whether MH370 should have created a detectable event. His paper basically discusses some historical antecedents in which planes hit the water and were detected. And but a few aspects of this, when you read it, and you're someone who this is what you do, bread and butter, something you do all the time. You're a researcher in the ocean, in acoustics, hydroacoustic detection, and so forth. Some of these things like raise red flags for you, right?
Well, I guess in terms of being already familiar with it and knowing the network that the paper was basing its analysis on
Right.
intimately. When I first got into thinking about MH370, that actually is how I started looking at these hydrophones, thinking that same process that, hey, if this made a really loud sound, there's this public network. That led me down to looking at things on a global scale, on years, and just kind of what are the sounds, what cause the sounds that are very low frequency that can be detected on these networks. And
So you guys are both motivated by the prime question, which is this plane went missing. We have this sensor network. Could this sensor network have detected this event and hopefully maybe help us find it?
yeah, and in terms of the group that maintains this nuclear detection network, it's a UN group, and they published in June of 2014 the possibility that there was a detection of this airplane on the network.
Okay.
So my diving into the network was to see if I could help find out if it was detected in more than one place. And I think Osama Kadri's paper in 2017, maybe it was analyzing the signal and trying to say that it could have been from the sound of an airplane crashing into the ocean.
Okay.
But there is some element of the timing. If you think about when you are counting the lightning strike that you see to the sound you hear, you get 7 seconds, it's going to be a mile away. Underwater, sound travels 4.5 times faster, so it would be a much further distance. But in terms of accuracy of a second, you're talking accuracy of about a mile.
Okay.
So when you are trying to see where the sound could be, and it's an hour different from where you would expect, it wouldn't be really plausible for that thing to be 3,600 miles away from
Right.
where you think it would be. So sound is extremely accurate. This network is actually based off of a way that they would find pilots during World War II. They would crash in the ocean. There's no way that they would have had a radio powerful enough to know. They drop a little explosive in the water that would sink down to the really deep sound channel, the SOFAR channel, where the sound is actually going to be refracting, kind of like a mirage,
Hmm.
within the deep part of the ocean, about half a mile deep. And
So it's a half mile deep, and it's almost like kind of like a coaxial cable, right? Where you put it when there's sound in this channel, it kind of bounces up and down within the layers of this layer, and it goes really, really far. If it's not in that channel, I think this is really important for people to understand. Sound will not travel very far in the ocean unless it's in this layer.
right, in terms of when you think about like the globe now on a spherical sense, and the ocean is an onion skin. How
Right.
does that sound travel around the surface of the globe? It has to be trapped, otherwise it'll be bouncing around, and that will get lost into all the reflections and scattering. But if it can
Right.
stay within that onion skin, not touching the bottom or not touching the surface, it can propagate from one continent all the way across the ocean to another continent.
Right.
But it does require getting sound down into that sound channel, either having the sound being made at the sound channel, as the pilots would drop these little bombs that would be then detected on multiple hydrophones, and you could say with a great accuracy that this pilot went down within this few 100-yard radius, and they could send a plane to go find them. Um,
Incredible. And did they actually do this? Did they actually find and rescue pilots because of this technology?
Yeah, and sometimes the name of this channel is actually called the SOFAR channel, and
Hmm.
was a sound ranging and fixing channel. So
Oh.
that was based off this network, the idea.
But the ocean is complicated enough. It's one of these things like most science really, like the deeper you go into it, the more kind of complications arise, right? And there's things like there's different temperature layers, salinity layers. If there's a reef, or the typology of the seabed could be complicated. Um, all of which I'm saying is because in this paper, Kadri said, "Well, look, we don't really know whether a 777 from first principles whether a 777 hitting the ocean will produce a signal that would be detectable by this network. So let me look at some historical antecedents, and we'll see if there's a reason why we think that it would." And he looked at a bunch of different crashes, two of which seemed particularly germane were Air France 447, which also that was a fairly low speed impact. It was about 200 kilometers an hour, which is like about the takeoff speed of a commercial airliner. Um, uh, and it hit the ocean, and was it detected? That was a question Kadri addressed. In the paper, he says that it was. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I don't remember him showing it that particular example being a positive detection.
So, full disclosure, as you know, I spoke to your colleague Alec Duncan, who is at Curtin University in Perth. You guys co-authored a paper, a paper that you presented at a conference last year, I think it was, where you looked at the same issue, and he is very skeptical. He's, I think, almost even more skeptical than you, and
Oh
you're
yeah.
pretty skeptical. He didn't think that the Air Kadri does claim that Air France 447 was detected. Um, Dr. Duncan Alec does not think that it was. And another historical antecedent that Kadri looked at was Transair Flight 810, which was a cargo plane that ditched shortly after takeoff from Hawaii. And this again would be a relatively low speed impact. When I say low speed, I mean in compared to a plane going nose down and hitting the ocean at close to the speed of sound. So we have this. So as we talk about low speed and high speed impacts, I think we need to clarify what that means. It's like it's a impact of 100 to 200 knots versus like 400 to 500 knots, something really fast.
Yeah, and I
But
guess
any
just to clarify that a little bit, you
Yeah,
do have to think about that we're not just talking about speed, but we're talking about velocity. And the velocity is the speed and the direction. And an
okay,
important part of momentum is that when you're playing pool and you have a glancing blow on the ball, it doesn't matter how hard you hit that cue ball, it's not going to move as fast as if you hit it straight on.
okay.
So the verticality of the impact. So you may be going 200 miles an hour, but did it hit the ground at I guess, how fast was it losing altitude? In that component of it, which will be
That's a great
smaller
point. I
than
think Air France 447, a ditching landing would be close to horizontal, low angle, so less energy imparted into the water. Air France 447, I think, was about a 45-degree angle. So both faster and steeper. And then, of course, a vertical impact would be both high speed and high angle. So
right.
in both extremes, you have.
And with the airplane, there's a velocity and also an aspect to the airplane. So airplane can be
Right.
pitched like this and sinking straight down, or it could be going
Right, so if you have
sideways.
a tail strike followed by a belly strike followed by the nail, so yes, um, so so anyway, Transair Flight A10 would have been a low angle, low speed, low velocity, um, and so low energy event. And Kadri in his paper says that this was detected at a range of 3,600 kilometers. And this is very germane to to MH370, which you and I discussed previously at some length, which is that in order to travel through this long distance channel, the SOFAR channel, it has to get into it. And so, if something like a submarine, like the San Juan submarine, which imploded and was discovered using this kind of network, it imploded in the channel. So it was very easy for that very energetic event to spread those sound waves. But if you're hitting the surface near Hawaii, it's not going to be very easy to get that sound into the channel.
I think that there's not really any good precedents. The only precedents we have for detecting an airplane crashing into the ocean on this network is this F-35. And
Right.
I think that paper was trying to show that any airplane is going to be detected on this network um, using these examples these published examples that are well referenced in the paper.
Yeah.
Uh, it is a bit of a unfortunate stretch because I think that, especially in terms of some of the contradiction in terms of the timing of the signals, there's not that much uncertainty.
So just to kind of boil it down as concisely as I can, um, you and Alec looked at an event which had attracted attention very early on. To cut to the chase, it seems like it most likely originated nowhere near the seventh arc, actually to the northwest of Diego Garcia in the northern Indian Ocean, so very, very far from the seventh arc, and therefore very likely not to do with MH370, although we will discuss the possibility in a second. However, Kadri's paper looked at a different event, which actually was detected at Cape Lewin earlier. And this is where I think is like really the huge red flag with this paper, because Kadri, whatever his method of calculation was, he calculated that this event was arriving from a direction of 306 degrees, basic meaning to the northwest. And talking to you, talking to Alec, I think you guys are saying no. That is just you're just miscalculating it. Like it's not coming from that direction at all. It's actually coming from Antarctica, which is a very frequent producer of underwater sounds. And so what he's doing is he's spun a whole paper out of a miscalculation of an event that's completely irrelevant. Do you think that's accurate?
Um, I would say if you were to ask how many fingers I'm holding up and I hold my hand this way, it's a really hard answer.
Okay.
And I would say that's probably what is going on in terms of he's trying to say it's coming from that direction. And then when you actually look at it in a more comprehensive sense, you know, it's not. And
Okay.
there's four fingers here. It's not, you know, however many I'm saying. I'm going to get my hand down here so I can't see my thumb.
Right. No, that's a great analogy. Okay.
So there's something I think that is alias with his results, and so Alec and I actually reached out to Osama because I was a little bit concerned about this Transair 810 contradiction, and in my my ocean research, I'm studying the accuracy of that propagation from the sensors from Hawaii, so it was almost exactly the same path here. And I've been studying this transmissions for over 3 decades of transmissions to measure the ocean temperature. And on both of these locations, it clearly is what you'd expect. The closer one hears it before, and the later one hears it roughly 40 seconds later, and it doesn't change. And so having that expertise and seeing this contradiction, I had to reach out to the author just to ask why, because I also agree that if you were to put something so energetic into the ocean, why wouldn't you hear it?
This sound not that Kadri wrote about, but this other one that you and Alec wrote about that was in the northern Indian Ocean. Alec and I think others have speculated that it was most likely some kind of earthquake or other natural event. Because the timing was so close to the last transmission from MH370, you're open to the possibility that it could have been MH370, although that would require the Inmarsat data to somehow be wrong or misinterpreted or something.
The timing of it is all right.
Right.
It's the problem with the precise timing of this microsecond accuracy from these satellite networks that are focusing the research or focusing the search to this one area. And if you look at all of the uncertainties there, you can't really expand the uncertainties without destroying the hypothesis of the seventh arc. And
yeah, you raised a really interesting point in your paper that you did with Alec, which is something I've mentioned in the podcast as well. This idea of Bayesian inference and the idea that if you have data, you have a model, you project what might happen in the future, or you project what future data will show you. When that future data doesn't match, you not only can modify your future predictions, but you can also modify your assessment of the accuracy of the data you've accumulated in the past. You draw you point out Air France 447, which the initial search was unsuccessful, and basically they were able to use this kind of Bayesian principle to realize that an assumption that they had made, namely that the black box acoustic transmitter was working, was wrong. And so therefore they needed to throw out that assumption. And once they did change their assumptions, they found it quite quickly.
yeah, and I believe that in terms of the actual order there, they did that analysis after they found it. But they did the Bayesian based off of when they wanted to go back out. They went out twice to search for this thing with bottom scanners, and they missed it. And then when they found it didn't work, it's like, well, look at that.
I see.
But when they included the black box in their Bayesian model, because they did have some uncertainty associated with it, what's the chance of detecting it? Let's say 40% or something like that. That there was
Right.
a shading there, but it still was a higher confidence than going further away from the last known place. I think what's
Right.
really difficult about the MH370 is that we know for a fact that it flew for 6 hours after it didn't communicate anymore, and there's no last known spot with a reckoning that puts you anywhere but anywhere in the ocean. The Australians did a really good job kind of summarizing the analysis with all the flight dynamics, all
Yeah.
of the routes that could have been entered into the autopilot, and they weren't operating under the assumption of a rogue pilot theory at that point. I think that's came out to be almost a consequence of the fact that it had to have been crashed on the seventh arc. I guess in terms of what the hell happened, we don't know.
Well, you're right. We do know that the plane flew for another 6 hours. What we do also know, or can say with a large degree of certainty, that the plane isn't where in the initial zone where they calculated that it must have gone, or not must have gone, but at one point they said we're covering a 97% probability distribution, and then they doubled it after that, and then they doubled it again, and so they've covered some very high 90 something percent of their probability distribution. They said themselves in the final report that we don't really have any other ideas about where to look, and so I think my sort of Bayesian gloss on the situation is that they had made some faulty assumptions, and they've made some, they've improperly weighted their priors, and they just don't know what. And I think that my argument is that you might have to like unclutch your fingers around some of your tightly held beliefs about your priors because you were wrong. I mean, we know that you were wrong because you don't have the plane.
High confidence that there's not there, and
Right.
that is where they're able to go back and not have to scan the whole area again. So, I mean, I'm sure there are people that think like they did a bad job scanning, and I think that's really unfair to a group of professionals that are doing one of the hardest
Yeah.
jobs. And this is an airplane. It's not something small. It would have been found if they went over it. Now, you could
The
be away in some
ATSB
small
themselves
spot.
said that
Right.
they would have found it if it was there. I mean,
Yeah.
they have like literally like a photographic, It's not like looking for your keys that you drop into like your shrubbery, It's like dropping your keys on the kitchen floor. It's like if it's there, you'll see it. David, I really appreciate you taking the time. There's one last thing I want to ask you, which is that, so one of the things that Kadri proposes that I think is less problematic. Before I say this, let me say, you feel that this paper is so problematic that it should be maybe retracted.
I mean, there needs to be an explanation in terms of why there are some contradictions in the paper.
Okay.
And I think in terms of wanting him to do that, I would think that makes sense. I also understand that there's a lot of enthusiasm to go back out and look for this airplane, and that any enthusiasm that that you can add to it would maybe make it feel like, well, I won't retract it yet. But what if I do find it, or something along?
Yeah.
In terms of when this plane is finally found, when we finally map the seabed completely in 2030. There's a big project to map the entire seabed.
The seabed is going to be mapped by 2030?
That's a global initiative.
Well, so that will solve it. That will solve the thing.
You would hope so, but I think
Okay.
that's much like getting to Mars in 2028 or whatever. It's a bit of a.
Is it like going to Mars, or is it like mapping the genome? Because I'm old enough to remember when like that was a crazy idea.
Yeah, I mean it can be done. We have the technology. It's expensive, but
It's getting cheaper. I mean, robots are getting more and more capable.
and the expertise is up there. And the search team that would go back out probably would be this Ocean Infinity again, and they'd look
Like
for
they're in the wreck search. They're finding underwater treasure, so they're motivated. If they can do
not
it
just
cheaply
treasure,
enough,
too. They help solve these mysteries. And I think
Yeah.
in terms of once it's found, there could be publications there, but I would think making any assertions is difficult. And I understand that his paper is constrained by the seventh arc. But it's not a very complete analysis in terms of a Bayesian type, including this information. And I think that Alec and I both had exchanges with him to try to help understand what was wrong with the processing that was going on. Um, Now, I think that I probably do agree with Dr. Kadri that if the airplane crashed, much like the F-35 did, it could have made a loud enough sound to be heard, and it could have made
Okay,
a lot.
that's really important. I think this state of play, as I see it from your perspective, I think Alec actually disagrees. But I feel like your position is, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but if it was a high speed impact, it would have been detected. If it was a low speed impact, it probably wouldn't have been detected.
And I guess in terms of if it was detected, it was a high-speed impact. I
Okay.
would say that. And if it wasn't detected, well, I can say if it was detected, it wasn't on the seventh arc. And I don't see any way that it would have been detected on one hydrophone and not the other two of the network
Okay.
to have this. And why it wouldn't have been detected on the other network. That is, there's one at the off of Diego Garcia on the
Right.
south side and has a direct exposure to this
It
point.
wasn't. That was out of that was taken off the table because it was getting swamped with air gun noise
See,
from a.
that doesn't really make sense in terms of talking about a big sound. We're not talking
Right.
about small sound. Um,
Right.
and it's difficult to deal with those noises, but you can deal with those noises.
Oh,
And
really? You think it would have? Okay.
because that air gun survey lasts all day. So the analysis that I've done on the Diego Garcia is assuming a loud sound on the other side of, and I actually do have a presentation when I was much younger. I think it's on YouTube. 2017, I went to Vienna to talk to the group about, and I met Dr. Metz there, and he was a new PhD as well. Um, and he was about to go to Jams Tech, and I presented the idea that we could have heard this airplane crash. Now, I think the
Right.
hope of finding something where there's nothing obvious is a little far-fetched, and I think that
Okay.
when you look at these other events like the Transair 810, oh, it must have made a sound. Let me go find uh, a sound where I think it would have been, and oh, here's a sound. That must be it. It's different than trying to rigorously go through and say, well, where was that sound coming from? Instead of,
Mm.
and that's the problem that
So you think
Alex
the
and I were
transair
having.
detection was in the wrong direction?
Yeah, it was not. It was in the wrong direction since it was arriving further away before closer. So it's coming
Oh
actually
wow.
from the
Okay.
south. If things make sound in the ocean, they're heard, and you can hear them in a few different places. There's a good chance you can pinpoint exactly where that sound is.
Okay,
Um,
so if we imagine that a high speed impact would probably be detected and a low speed impact wouldn't be detected, there's presumably some kind of intermediary cutoff where it would no longer be detected. And I thought Kadri, regardless of the merits of the rest of his paper, did have an interest. It was interesting to me. I'm a layman. I want to ask you if you think it's interesting. He proposed going out to the seventh arc and putting some bombs in the water, bombs or air guns or some kind of way of making noises, maybe different depths, maybe different sizes, to try to get a sense of okay, what will be detected and what won't be detected. So what might we expect to see? I had drawn an analogy in my earlier episode about the dog that didn't bark in the night in the Sherlock Holmes story, and the problem with that analogy is that we don't know if we heard the dog. We don't know if we would have heard the dog if it barked or not. Do you think that this idea of going out to the seventh arc and putting some explosives or making some sound out there as a test, as a baseline establishment exercise would be interesting?
um, I mean, I guess in terms of what you would expect, an ocean acoustic model can give you a pretty good handle on that.
Okay.
Where you would blow that bomb up in terms of how close to the surface or down deeper would be the major determining factor if you hear it or not. And
Right.
the
But
closer you
you could do a whole bunch and sort of see.
yeah, and I guess if that's going to give you a feeling of, okay, I did detect it, you could probably do some interesting science with it, but I don't know if it reads. You blow up a bomb in the SOFAR channel on the seventh arc, you're going to hear it in Diego Garcia, and you're going to
Well,
hear
no,
it.
we would want to know. We would try to produce something vaguely analogous to an airplane hitting the surface.
I think that is where how the airplane hits the surface is really going to change what it sounds like, and
Right.
the can you simulate that with a model, or do you have to fly an airplane into the surface? I
Wow.
mean, unfortunately, we have an example with this F-35 of where
Right.
conditions required for making a sound. I am not entirely convinced that the modeling can be so reduced to what we would call a point source at a particular depth. But it is a
But
tool
if the
that we,
data existed, if somebody did the experiment, you'd look at it.
yeah. And in terms of, yeah, this is a nice part about public networks like this. You can just look at that.
Yeah.
So, if this, and I don't think there's any harm in doing it. I don't know if we would learn anything if we do learn that you can hear a bomb going off 100 feet below the surface. Um, what does that mean? Um,
Right.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it probably would make sense to try to do it in March if you're going to do it because the
Right.
oceanography may be different, and that's
Right.
kind of what we were talking about. I believe it's pretty cold there though, so you probably get a pretty decent amount of propagation on the surface.
Well, David, listen, that is extremely helpful. I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's really, I think, illustrative of the principle that ordinary people can read a scientific paper and come to a conclusion and write news articles about it, and then when you talk to people who this is really their field, you get a very different picture. So I think Kadri was interpreted as saying pretty plainly that it seemed like that this event wasn't there, but it seems like it's much more nuanced and complicated. And you and I had just had a prior conversation about this, and I know that there's even more nuances that we didn't quite touch on, but hopefully for viewers of the podcast, this will have illuminated the issue a bit. And I think we really need to. We need to keep looking. This. I don't think this really settles the matter one way or the other. But I'm going to put a link to your paper, or I'll actually put the paper itself because I don't know if it's available online on the show page for this episode. If that's okay with you.
Sure, the one that Alec and I did in the
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think there's some stuff that may. I mean, if the search goes back up, that would be just absolutely wonderful, and I think that I would just be sad if they looked in the same place.
Yeah, for sure. All right, David. Well, listen. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Bye bye.
All right, bye.
Well, that's all I have for you today. I want to thank Dr. David Dell'Osto from the University of Washington once again for taking the time to speak with us. This is some pretty deep stuff, but it's a complicated case, and we have to go deep to really understand what happened. So, once again, if you appreciate what we're doing, please hit like, subscribe, go over to the show page and sign up for the weekly newsletter that we put there. This is a collaborative endeavor. We really value your input, your ideas, your comments. So please, you can leave comments on the YouTube video. You can leave them at the show page on Substack, findingmh370.com. So let me leave you with the things I always say, which is don't stop looking and don't stop asking hard questions. Thanks a lot. See you next time.